Hello everyone. I'm really glad you're here. Tonight, I want to help you let go of the day and ease into rest. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, and it means a lot to be part of your nightly routine. So if you haven't already, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It truly helps. Now, settle in, close your eyes, and let's begin. The story 1, The Secret Knock. There was something sacred about childhood hideouts, those secret places where imagination gave form to adventure and rules of the ordinary world no longer applied. For me, that place was a forgotten, weather-worn cabin tucked away in the mountains, discovered during my 4th year of elementary school. I used to spend afternoons after class with 2 friends, and together we stumbled across the cabin while exploring one of our usual trails. The grate was small, sun-bleached, and its roof slanted in a way that made it look like it was trying to hide from the world. Inside, there were cobwebs stretched across broken furniture, and the air smelled of dust and forgotten stories. To us, it was a treasure, a fortress from the mundane. We claimed it silently and without permission, hauling in snacks, comics, and even a few old chairs to make it feel like home. It became our secret base, and we treated it like a kingdom. We took its secrecy seriously. Nobody from school, not even our other friends, was allowed inside unless they were sworn to the oath. We pooled our money to buy a padlock for the outside, along with a bolt for the inside, and agreed that only the keeper of the day decided each morning at school would hold the key. And just in case, we created a secret knock. 2 taps. It was a ritual, an identity, a shield. We all agreed to never open the door unless the knock was perfect, no exceptions. On one particular afternoon, only 2 of us made it to the cabin. Our 3rd friend was running late due to a school activity, so we passed the time flipping through comics and sipping juice boxes, waiting in the safety of our fortress. Then came the knock. At first, we both rushed to the door, sure it was our missing friend, but just before I reached for the latch, my buddy grabbed my arm. "That's not the knock," he whispered. I stopped. It was close, similar enough that it made my heart hesitate, but it wasn't right. The pattern was off. Then, a voice from outside spoke. "Hey guys, it's me. Open the door." The voice was familiar, uncannily so. It sounded like him. 3 short knocks followed, quick and confident, but again not the code. I told my friend maybe he'd just forgotten the pattern, but my friend shook his head, reminding me that we had taken a vow, that the cabin was only safe if we followed the rules. The knocking came again, growing more impatient. More knocks, more voice commands. "Open it," the voice growled, now sterner, angrier. It no longer sounded like our friend. I stood frozen in the doorway, torn between curiosity and unease, so deep it felt ancestral. Something primal in me recoiled. The hammering on the door grew louder. The voice was distorted now, less human and more like a sound trying to wear a human shape. Then it stopped. Silence. I waited, breath shallow, then slowly unbolted the door and peeked outside. Nothing. The forest stood quiet as if nothing had happened. We locked up, hurried down the trail and went straight to our missing friend's house. His mother was in the yard. We asked about him. Her expression changed immediately. "He's at the hospital," she said. "High fever. He was rushed out of school in an ambulance." My friend and I went pale. There was no way he could have been at the cabin, or anywhere near it. The voice we heard, the one that mimicked him, wasn't him. We said our goodbyes and walked home in separate directions. I got home first, still shaken, and dropped my backpack in the living room. The house was empty, my mum still at work. I poured myself a drink, then lay down on the sofa to rest, trying to forget about the cabin, the knock, and the voice that wasn't quite human. I must have closed my eyes for less than a minute when it started again. This time the knock wasn't at the cabin, it was at my own front door. I sat up slowly, ears alert. The knock came again. 2 knocks, a pause, 1 knock, a pause, then 3. Exactly. My stomach turned. There was no way this could be a coincidence. I got up and approached the door. Through the frosted glass I saw a silhouette, large, unmoving, much too tall to be any of my friends. Whatever it was stood completely still, waiting. I didn't open the door. I reached for the phone and dialed my friend who had been with me at the cabin. I told him what was happening. "It's doing the knock. Our knock." My voice was trembling. There was a pause on the line, and then I swear I heard another voice through the receiver. A cold, distant whisper. "Open the door." That's the last thing I remember before everything went black. I awoke sometime later on the couch. The phone was on the floor. I picked it up, no dial tone, just silence. I placed it back on the cradle and backed away. My skin felt cold, as though something had passed through me. The next day at school, my friend said he heard knocking at his house too. Same pattern, same feeling of dread. We never went back to the cabin after that. We later read stories, local legends, old reports, about families that used to send sick relatives into the mountains during disease outbreaks. Is it possible one of them died alone in that cabin, forever searching for someone to let them in? Maybe. Or maybe it was something far older. Something that waits for the echo of children's laughter. Something drawn to rituals and rules it can twist. We don't talk about it much now, but we both still remember the knock. And we both know it still remembers us too. Story 2. The Cabin by the Lake. There's a certain freedom that comes with being a teenager on a camping trip, especially when you're with close friends in a place where the world feels paused, where the silence of the woods wraps around you like a blanket, and the concerns of everyday life seem impossibly far away. My friend, a young woman from Buffalo, New York, once shared with me a story from her final year in high school, one that she still carries with her no matter how many years pass. She and 4 of her closest friends decided to book a stay at a cabin-lined campground upstate. Nestled along the quiet edges of a glassy lake, the cabins were spaced just far enough apart to allow for privacy, while still feeling connected to the hum of distant laughter and crackling fires. It was meant to be a weekend of innocent fun, marshmallows over fires, late-night ghost stories, and soft music echoing beneath the stars. As the day turned to evening and shadows lengthened across the still waters, the girls noticed a group of boys a few cabins down. They were about the same age, playing music a little too loud and dancing around a campfire with beers in hand. One of the boys noticed the girls watching and shouted an invitation to join them. Curious and excited, they accepted. The mood was warm, welcoming. Everyone seemed to be in high spirits, and for a while the two groups merged effortlessly, talking and laughing as if they'd known each other for years. But as night drew on, the energy shifted. One of the boys, a tall guy with sunburned cheeks and heavy eyelids, began to drink more than the others. He pulled out a revolver from his backpack, slurring something about it belonging to his father. At first, everyone thought it was a joke, a stupid prank, but as he began to wave the weapon around, it became clear no one was laughing. Even his friends were visibly alarmed, pleading with him to put it away. The girls exchanged uneasy glances and soon made an excuse to leave. They thanked the group, offered a few nervous smiles, and returned to their own cabin. The air now noticeably heavier. They locked the door behind them and huddled together in a circle, discussing the bizarre turn of events. No one quite knew how to feel. Part of them wanted to laugh it off, to move on with the night and enjoy the rest of their trip. But deep down, the unease lingered like a shadow at the edge of their thoughts. Hours passed. The fire outside their cabin had long since burned out, and the forest was again quiet. The girls were just starting to drift into sleep when a deafening bang shattered the stillness. It echoed across the campground, bouncing off trees and cabins like a thunderclap. Panic took hold. They sat up, wide-eyed, hearts pounding. Flashlights flickered outside as what seemed like half the campground came alive with confused murmurs and anxious steps. Minutes later, sirens howled in the distance, growing louder as red and blue lights bathed the forest. Police vehicles arrived quickly, and soon an officer was knocking at their door. He asked if they had visited the neighbouring cabin earlier in the evening. They confirmed that they had, their voices shaky, unsure of what this was about. The officer's next words struck them cold. The boy, the one with the revolver, had shot himself, right there in front of his friends. Whether it was accidental or intentional was still unclear, but the result was the same. A life was lost. A night meant for laughter had turned into tragedy. My friend said the officer's words didn't feel real at first. It was like hearing a line from a movie, something distant and dramatic, but not something that could have possibly happened just yards away from where they slept. The rest of the night passed in a blur of whispers, quiet tears, and the soft hum of emergency vehicles disappearing into the woods. The next morning the campground was hushed, subdued. The usual sounds of breakfast being made, of families getting ready for a day in the sun, were absent. No birds chirped, no laughter echoed across the lake. My friend and her group packed quietly, too disturbed to stay another night. On the drive home, no one said much. Occasionally someone would comment on the scenery or suggest stopping for food, but for the most part they sat in heavy silence, each replaying the night in their minds, wondering what might have happened if they hadn't left when they did. In the weeks that followed, the incident was all they could talk about. The shock faded slowly, but the image of that boy's smile, the gleam of the gun, and the echo of that bang never fully left them. My friend told me she still gets chills thinking about it. Sometimes, she said, she dreams about that night, not always in the way it really happened, but twisted, distorted. Sometimes the boy stands by their cabin door, smiling, asking why they left. Other times the sound of the gunshot wakes her before she even gets to sleep. It's something that stuck with her in ways she never expected. She stopped going camping after that, and even years later, the thought of being in a cabin, alone or even with friends, sends her heart racing. It's not just about fear anymore. It's about the weight of witnessing something so raw and irreversible. Trauma doesn't always come from direct confrontation. Sometimes it's the proximity to pain, the knowledge that if things had gone slightly differently, the story might have included you. Sometimes it's the helplessness, the feeling that you brushed shoulders with death and walked away changed. For my friend, that weekend in the woods became more than just a cautionary tale. It was a turning point, a reminder of how quickly joy can unravel, how a single bad decision, a single careless moment can ripple out and leave scars on everyone nearby. She's since moved on in many ways, built a life, made new memories. But the cabin story never really left her. She told me once that she still hears the boys' laugh in her memory. It was loud, carefree, full of life. It's hard to reconcile that sound with the silence that followed. That's the part that haunts her most, I think. Not the gun, not the blood, not even the sirens. It's the contrast. The shift from life to death in the space of a heartbeat. That, she said, is what you never forget. That's the kind of thing that lingers in the air, like the smell of firewood, long after the flames have died. In time, the campground repaired itself. The cabins were cleaned, the grounds re-leveled, and campers returned. But for my friend, there's a part of that place forever frozen in time. A shadow that will never fade. A bang that still echoes. Story 3. The Ghost Boy in the Cabin. Some stories settle into your memory not because they are loud or dramatic, but because they hum in the background of your thoughts for years. This one came from a childhood friend of mine who, like me, attended a summer camp deep in the wilderness. We were in the same cabin that summer, surrounded by tall pine trees in a sky so wide it swallowed the stars. Our days were spent hiking, canoeing and playing games under the sun, but the nights carried their own energy, silent, still, and just eerie enough to keep your senses on edge. One night, my friend Charlie and I had sneaked some instant coffee packs from the camp kitchen and mixed them with water after lights out. I handled the caffeine well, But Charlie wasn't used to it. While the rest of us drifted off to sleep in our bunks, Charlie stayed up reading a novel by flashlight, eyes darting across the pages, heart probably beating faster than it should have. It was some time after 1 a.m. when a scream shattered the stillness, the kind of scream that rips through the quiet and shakes the breath from your lungs. We bolted upright in our sleeping bags to find Charlie crying uncontrollably, curled into himself, his body shaking violently. His face was pale, his mouth struggling to form words, as the rest of us gathered around him, concern blooming into fear. It didn't take long for the teachers to arrive. The commotion was loud enough to wake everyone in the vicinity. They crowded into our cabin, trying to make sense of what had just happened, asking questions we couldn't yet answer. Charlie couldn't speak at first. He was too distraught. Eventually, as he calmed down, he began to describe what he saw. Charlie claimed he had seen a ghost. It had wandered through our cabin, moving slowly, gliding almost, as if untethered to the world we lived in. He said he heard the wind change as the ghost moved, a soft gust that whispered with its presence. One of the other boys supported his claim, admitting that he too had heard a strange breeze, though he hadn't seen anything. Charlie was sent home the next morning, camp resumed, though nothing quite felt the same. When we returned home weeks later, Charlie and I stayed in touch. He confided in me again, offering more details that chilled me to the bone. The ghost, he said, wasn't like the ones in movies. It wasn't draped in white or rattling chains. It was barely visible, almost transparent, and wore old-fashioned clothes, something you might see in a black and white photograph from long ago. What struck Charlie most wasn't the appearance of the ghost, but its face. For 3 full seconds he looked at it, frozen in place. It stared back at him with hollow, lifeless eyes that held no spark, no soul. And then it moved. The boy ghost rushed out of the cabin in a blur, making a sound that mimicked wind. It was at that moment Charlie screamed, startled not only by its sudden movement, but by the familiarity of the face. He said it looked just like me, a blank version of me, no emotion, no recognition, just a mirrored shell of a person he knew. I didn't know what to say when he told me that. It scared me, yes, but more than that, it unsettled something deeper, something I couldn't quite name. Charlie wasn't the type to make things up. He was grounded, logical, honest to a fault. That made his story all the more terrifying. If it had been anyone else, I might have dismissed it as a bad dream, a caffeine-induced hallucination. But I knew Charlie. He wasn't lying. He was traumatized, shaken in a way that couldn't be faked. We talked about the coffee, wondered if that might have played a role, but he had had it before with no strange side effects. He enjoyed it, even. And more importantly, none of the other nights ever resulted in anything remotely similar. This wasn't just a bad dream. It was something else, something that reached out from the veil between worlds and let itself be seen, even if only for a moment. After that summer, Charlie changed. He became quieter, more introspective. He used to laugh easily and tell jokes without warning, but now he watched people more, spoke less, and always seemed to carry an invisible weight on his shoulders. I never blamed him for it. How could I? If I had seen what he saw, if I had stared into the eyes of something that looked like me but wasn't alive, I think it would have broken something in me too. Sometimes, when we talk even now, he'll bring it up out of nowhere. Not to scare me or revisit it with excitement, but to make sure it's still real, like he needs to anchor himself to someone who was there, someone who believes him, and I do believe him, every word, because the way he described that moment, the way his voice trembled even years later, told me it was etched into him permanently. I've never seen a ghost myself, not in the way he did, but that night changed something for all of us. The way we saw the camp, the way we felt walking to the bathroom alone at night, the way we listened for sounds that for a while I thought maybe we'd all forget about it with time. that we'd grow up and look back with a shrug. But that never happened. It stayed, and if anything, it only grew more haunting with age. Some say spirits are just echoes of the past, fragments of emotion caught in time, unable or unwilling to move on. If that's true, then I wonder who that boy was, the one who looked like me. Was he someone who died there long ago? A child left behind by history? Or was he something else entirely? Something that wore my face not because it remembered me, but because it wanted me to remember him. I may never know, but what I do know is that night changed Charlie forever. And in some small, quiet way, it changed me too. I don't go back to that camp anymore. None of us do. It's still there, open every summer, filled with new kids and new laughter. But some places carry stories too heavy to shake off. Some cabins remember. And maybe, just maybe, the boy is still wandering through those wooden walls, waiting to be seen again, waiting to lock eyes with someone who won't forget him. Someone like Charlie. Story 4. Whispers in the Kitchen. There's a peculiar kind of quiet that surrounds cabins in the woods. It's not just silence, it's something deeper, almost sacred. A hush that presses against the walls after everyone goes to bed. My story begins in just such a moment. Late one winter evening, my wife and I had taken our 3 sons to the family cabin for a much-needed break from the noise of daily life. The cabin, nestled deep in the trees, had always carried a faint trace of mystery. From day one, there were little things, misplaced items, flickering lights, creaking floorboards, but nothing alarming, nothing we couldn't explain away. At least, not until that weekend. That night, my wife and kids went to bed around 10:30. The fire had died down to soft embers, and the house had settled into its stillness. I tiptoed into the kitchen to sneak a piece of the pan cookies my wife had made earlier. A small moment of indulgence before sleep. As I stood there with the knife cutting a square from the tray, I heard it, a voice. Soft, feminine, and close. It whispered, "What are you doing in here?" My heart lurched and I instinctively answered, "Mary?" without turning around. But when I did look, the kitchen was empty. No shadows in the hallway, no movement in the corners. Just the cookies, the dim nightlight above the stove, and my own reflection in the kitchen window. I chalked it up to imagination, or maybe the house shifting. I went back to cutting another slice, trying to shake it off. Then, just as I reached for the plate, the voice returned, clearer, more insistent. "Hey, are you going to eat that? I want one." My blood ran cold. It was not playful or friendly. It felt off. I didn't wait to see where it came from. I rushed out of the kitchen and dove into bed, heart racing, breathing shallow, trying not to wake my wife. She was still awake and gave me a puzzled look. I didn't tell her what I heard. I didn't want to sound crazy. 10 minutes later, I forced myself back into the kitchen to clean up the mess I had left, but the room was quiet again, normal again. No voice, no strange feelings. Just the low hum of the fridge and the steady tick of the old wall clock. The next night passed uneventfully. Until I climbed into bed, I lay on my side, eyes closed, drifting towards sleep when I felt it. A tug on my sleeve. At first I thought it was one of the boys, but when I turned to look, no one was there. Just the pale blue glow of the moonlight leaking through the curtains. And then, as if whispered directly into my ear, I heard it again. "Mum? Dad?" The voice was small, childlike, and echoing with a sadness that tightened my chest. I leapt out of bed and crossed the hall to the boys' room. They were sound asleep, all 3 of them breathing peacefully. No one stirring, no sign of movement. But I still heard whispers behind me, faint, unintelligible. It was like someone was trying to speak from far away, from behind a layer of static. Something was in the cabin with us, something that didn't belong. I didn't feel threatened exactly, but I did feel watched, as though something had been waiting for the night to fall, for the silence to return before stepping forward. I spent the rest of that night wide awake, staring at the ceiling, counting the spaces between each creak of the wood and wondering if I would hear that voice again. Over the next few days the incidents faded, no more whispers, no more tugs on sleeves, but the unease lingered, subtle but sharp. My kids didn't mention anything strange, and my wife never brought it up. Maybe they didn't hear what I heard. Maybe whatever it was chose me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had attached itself to our presence in that cabin. It wasn't malevolent, not in the way movies show ghosts, no cold hands or rattling chains, but it was persistent, it was curious, and it was not human. I started to wonder if it had always been there, living in the silence, in the pauses between footsteps, in the corners we never quite looked into long enough. One night, when the kids were asleep and my wife was reading, I walked quietly through the cabin with a flashlight, stopping at every room, every creak in the floor. I paused at the door to the attic, a space we never used. I reached for the doorknob, but I couldn't bring myself to turn it. Instead, I just stood there, breathing slowly, listening. And there it was again. A sigh, just one. Faint, hollow, and unmistakably close. I backed away. I didn't want answers anymore. I just wanted the peace we came here for. I went back to bed, slid under the covers and stared at the ceiling once more. This time, I didn't hear anything else, but I still couldn't sleep. Eventually, I told my wife about everything. The voice in the kitchen, the tug on the sleeve, the whisper in the dark. She didn't laugh. She didn't dismiss it. Instead, she said she once heard something similar, months ago on a different trip. A child's voice calling out from the hallway when no one else was awake. She had convinced herself it was a dream, but hearing me say it made her pause. We sat in the living room for hours that night, sipping tea, watching the fireplace, not speaking much, just listening. We never heard the voice again after that trip. Maybe acknowledging it gave it peace. Maybe it just lost interest. Or maybe it's still there, whispering through the trees, waiting for the next visitor. Now, when we return to that cabin, and we do still return, I bring a different kind of awareness. I listen more closely. I pause before entering rooms. And sometimes, late at night, when the kids are tucked in and the wind howls just right, I think about that voice and wonder if it's watching from the shadows, waiting for someone to talk to. Not all hauntings are horror stories. Some are just echoes, some are just lonely. And in the stillness of the forest, even the echoes have a voice. Story 5. The Shadows of the Black Isles. Every December, just as the frost began to cling to windows and the days shortened into hushed blue evenings, our family would make its annual journey to the Highlands of Scotland. My mother, 2 older brothers, and I would visit my aunt and cousins near a quiet village in the Black Isles, an area soaked in ancient history and local folklore. Though the destination was technically a town called Catty, most people just referred to it by the broader and eerier name of the Black Isles. The land was rugged, mystical, and according to whispered tales once a place where witches gathered under the pale light of Halloween moons, performing dark rituals and animal sacrifices. Whether those stories were fact or fiction, no one ever really knew. But every year as we unpacked our bags and settled into the holiday homes just a short walk from my cousin's place, I always felt the weight of something, watching from the woods, something old. This particular trip began like all the others: laughter, reunions, the smell of roasted food wafting through warm kitchens. Our holiday home was large enough to accommodate all of us, with multiple bedrooms and enough space to stretch out during the cold Highland nights. I was sharing a room with one of my brothers and his close friend from Africa, who was visiting for the first time. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I lay awake, staring into the dark. There was no reason for it, no sound, no discomfort, just an unshakable feeling that sleep wouldn't come. The room was pitch black, save for the dull orange glow of a hallway light peeking under the door. I could hear my brother and his friend breathing softly, already deep in slumber. But then the door creaked open slowly, and my breath caught in my throat. I didn't see anything at first, just a darker shape against the already dark room. It was as if something had slipped through the doorway without a sound. My eyes adjusted slowly, and then I began to see them. Figures. 3 of them. They were not men nor ghosts in the traditional sense, but black, undulating shadows. One hovered over my brother's bed, the other over his friend. Their movements slow, their presence oppressive. The third one stood beside my own bed, closer than I could bear. It had no face, no features, just the vague outline of a human form, as if it had been hastily drawn with black ink and then set loose in the world. I was frozen, utterly paralyzed by fear, unable to cry out, unable to look away. The room felt heavy, like it was filled with thick smoke, and I could sense this third figure watching me, not with eyes, but with something deeper, more invasive. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I did the only thing I could think to do. I turned over and faced the wall. I tried to convince myself that if I didn't see it, it would leave me alone. I stayed that way, trembling under my blanket, until exhaustion claimed me and I slipped into an uneasy sleep. The next morning I told my family what I had seen. As expected, most of them laughed it off. They teased me about the witches of the Black Isles, about the highland haunts, brushing it aside as just another ghost story born from an overactive imagination. But one person didn't laugh. My brother's girlfriend had been sleeping in the next room over. She looked at me with wide eyes and said she had experienced something too. In the middle of the night, she had woken up to the feeling of someone sitting on her legs. She said she felt the full weight of a person on top of her, pressing her into the mattress, but when she looked, no one was there. She couldn't move, couldn't scream, just lay there in the dark, heart pounding, waiting for the sensation to pass. When it finally did, she sat up and looked around the room. Nothing, not a sound, not a trace, just the creeping dread of something that didn't belong. Her story gave mine weight that made me feel a little less insane, but it also made everything more terrifying. Whatever this was, whatever had entered our rooms that night, had touched us both. It had chosen us, or maybe followed the energy of fear we gave off in the silence. Either way, it wasn't just my imagination anymore. It was something real. Later that day, I found myself drawn to the guest book in the front room of the holiday home. I flipped through the pages, looking for any mention of strange occurrences, ghost sightings, or unexplained sounds. But there was nothing. Just cheerful notes about peaceful vacations and beautiful scenery. No one else had written about shadow figures or ghosts. But maybe, I thought, they just didn't want to remember, or maybe whatever we had encountered chose its moments carefully, revealing itself only when the atmosphere was just right, quiet, dark, and vulnerable. I knew then I would never forget what I saw. No matter how much time passed, the memory was carved into me, a permanent echo of that night. Since then, I've never returned to that holiday home. I don't think I could. Even now, years later, I sometimes dream of the figure by my bed, its formless face inches from mine, its silence more deafening than any scream. I can still feel the weight of its gaze, the way it pressed into my thoughts like cold fingers. Sometimes, when I lie awake at night, I wonder if it really stayed behind in the black, or if it followed me, lurking just out of sight, waiting for another moment of darkness. That's the thing with spirits, with shadows. Once they've seen you, once they've chosen to reveal themselves, they never really leave. And though I've tried to bury the memory under logic and skepticism, there are moments, brief, flickering seconds, where the room goes quiet and I feel it again. That pressure in the air, that subtle shift in temperature, that instinct to turn toward the wall and pray that when I open my eyes, I'll still be alone. I tell myself it was just a trick of the light, a bad dream, magnified by the strangeness of the highlands, but deep down, I know better. I felt it, I saw it, and so did she. That cabin held something ancient, something patient, a shadow from a time long forgotten, waiting in the dark for another soul to stir. So, if you ever find yourself near Inverness, driving through the still woods of the Black Isles, and you happen to see a sign for the Burn Farm Mackenzie Cottage, remember this story, and if you decide to stay there, do yourself a favour. Keep your doors closed at night, don't invite silence, and above all, don't ignore the creak of a door slowly opening, because sometimes the shadows aren't in your mind. Sometimes they're real, and sometimes they're watching. Story 6. The Humming Woman of Antietam. There's something different about the air in old places, homes touched by time, surrounded by forgotten fields, carrying whispers of past lives. Years ago, I lived in a quiet log cabin just down the road from the historic Antietam battlefield. The land there is soaked in history, its soil having witnessed unimaginable pain during the Civil War. At first, it was just a charming old house with creaky floors and weathered beams, nestled beneath the trees like a forgotten. But the longer I stayed, the more I felt that I was not alone. The nights were the worst. While everyone else slept peacefully in their beds, I would lie awake on the couch, my chosen sleeping spot at the time, listening to the sounds of the house breathing, waiting for something I couldn't name. It always started the same way, a soft humming, not from the walls or the pipes or the wind brushing the trees outside. This was close, too close. It was a woman's voice, humming gently, as if trying to soothe a child or pass the time with an old lullaby. I was the only woman living in that house, which made the sound all the more unsettling. It wasn't loud, not at first. It hovered just at the edge of hearing, like the memory of a song you're not sure you ever learned. Some nights it came from the kitchen, other nights from the stairs. But always, it stayed just out of sight. I would sit up, straining to listen, and the humming would fade, slipping back into the silence like a hand withdrawing from cold water. There were other things too. At night, while trying to fall asleep, I would sometimes feel a jolt, a sensation like someone running full force into the couch, not once or twice, but often enough to startle me, to keep me on edge. It never came with a sound. No footsteps, no creaks on the floorboards, just a sudden impact, as if some invisible presence had collided with the space I occupied. I would bolt upright, heart racing, only to find the room empty. It was like being haunted by the aftermath of something, energy caught in a loop, never finding its way out. I never mentioned it to my family. What would I even say? That I was being body-checked by a ghost? The experience that finally confirmed my suspicions came not from inside, but from outside. One afternoon, I heard the familiar low murmur of voices on the front porch and assumed it was neighbours walking past or someone out for a stroll. But as I approached the window to look, I saw them, members of the local tour group, casually sitting on the porch of my cabin, pointing and discussing the house with an eerie reverence. They had gathered as if it was some kind of landmark. This wasn't the first time either. I'd seen them before, lingering near the porch, sometimes stopping to glance up at the windows. But this time, I decided to listen in on what they were saying. What I heard froze me in place. They were talking about hauntings, about stories passed down over decades, strange sightings, flickering shadows, and a humming woman often seen standing near the windows after dark. One woman in the group mentioned that she used to live nearby and had always heard stories about the singing ghost of the cabin down by the battlefield. That was my house. My couch. My nights filled with whispers and impact. In that moment, all the rational explanations I had held on to crumbled. I wasn't imagining this. I wasn't alone. Something had claimed that space long before I did, and it hadn't left. I didn't move out immediately. For a while, I convinced myself I could live with it. As long as she didn't hurt me, I thought. What harm could a little humming do? But the truth is, the longer I stayed, the more unsettled I became. I started hearing the humming even during the day, faintly, beneath the noises of cooking and cleaning. I saw doors shift slightly as if pushed by a breath of wind from someone long gone. The light in the hallway flickered no matter how often I changed the bulb. And at night, that same feeling returned, the undeniable sense that I was being watched, not with malice, but with presence, with memory, with sadness. One evening, I gathered the courage to speak aloud. I sat on the couch, turned toward the darkened kitchen and said, "I know you're here. I don't want to hurt you. I'm just passing through." The humming didn't come that night, nor did the feeling of someone running into the couch. For a moment, I felt like maybe that was what she needed, recognition, a voice acknowledging hers. But the peace was temporary. Within days, it started again, the rhythms repeating themselves like verses in a song that never ends. I realized then that some spirits aren't waiting to be heard. They've already accepted their fate, and they simply continue, caught in echoes of their final emotions. Grief, longing, confusion. Eventually, I moved, not because anything violent ever happened, but because I couldn't rest. The weight of that house, of her presence, was too much to carry, night after night. I still pass by it sometimes, driving through the winding roads that lead past the battlefield. I never stop, I never slow down, but I do glance toward the porch, half expecting to see her standing there, watching as the world forgets her. I wonder who she was. A nurse, a grieving widow, a girl who never left her childhood home. I'll never know. But her song remains with me, drifting into my thoughts sometimes when the house is quiet and the wind outside sounds just a little too familiar. And in that way, I suppose, she succeeded. She's not forgotten. Her humming still lives on, not just in the beams of that cabin, but in my memory, in the shared quiet of others who've heard something similar. She became a part of my story as I became a small part of hers. Not all hauntings are violent. Some are just lonely hearts singing into the silence, hoping someone will hum back. Story 7. The Ceiling That Watched. It was meant to be a celebration. My brother's bachelor party was planned as a weekend of laughter and drinks, a short escape into the quiet of nature before the whirlwind of his wedding. A group of his friends had rented a cabin deep in the woods of Yosemite, a rugged yet beautiful slice of land where the air was crisp and the nights felt darker than city dwellers could ever imagine. I wasn't one of the louder ones, not the type to stay up drinking until dawn, but I enjoyed being there, being part of it. That first night we arrived late, the stars already high in the sky, the treetops swaying like they were whispering things we couldn't quite hear. Everyone was excited. Music played softly through a Bluetooth speaker while bags were tossed onto bunk beds and pizza boxes filled the dining table. The energy was infectious. But the cabin had other plans. As I settled into the room I shared with my brother, something caught my attention immediately. The ceiling above us was creaking. Not the usual pops and groans of a wooden house adjusting to temperature, but deliberate, rhythmic creaks, as though someone was walking across the rafters in a slow, measured pattern. I tried to dismiss it. Maybe it was just the wind, or maybe a small animal, nothing serious, but deep down, I could tell something about it felt too intentional. I remember glancing at my brother, who seemed oblivious, already half asleep from the beer and exhaustion. I closed my eyes and let it go, though unease pooled quietly at the back of my thoughts. By the third night, My nerves were stretched thinner than I realized. Everyone else was still in the main room, playing card games and passing around drinks, their laughter muffled by the thick wooden walls. I was tired and decided to head to bed early. The same room, the same creaky ceiling. But this time the sound returned almost immediately. Footsteps, heavy, slow and deliberate. Then something new, a soft scraping sound like nails against the beams. I sat up, holding my breath. There was no attic, no second floor. Whatever was moving above us shouldn't have been there. Still, I stayed quiet, convincing myself it had to be something explainable. I turned to face the wall and closed my eyes, determined not to let paranoia get the better of me. That's when the bronze tile on the wall, a purely decorative square, began to move. It tapped once, then again, and then it scraped against the wood, grinding softly as though something was testing it, toying with it. My breath caught in my throat. The room was dimly lit from a nightlight across the hall, and the shadows shifted unnaturally. There was no wind, no draft, no movement in the air. I turned onto my back, staring at the ceiling, every nerve on fire, every sense alert. And then I felt it, a hand, cold and unseen, wrapped tightly around my forearm. The pressure was undeniable, not a brush, not a trick of the mind, a full, tangible grip. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I whispered one word into the dark. Nope. That was all I could manage, as if acknowledging it might make it worse. After a few seconds, the grip released, and I stayed frozen in place, heart hammering. I could hear the creaking again, but now it came from the hallway ceiling, as if whatever it was had moved on, searching for someone else to touch. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay there, staring at the walls, feeling the weight of the unknown pressing in from all sides. The sounds stopped eventually, but the memory of that cold grip lingered, imprinting itself on my skin. The next morning, I told no one. The guys were busy planning hikes, cooking breakfast, talking about marriage and life after the wedding. I didn't want to be the one who ruined the mood. But I started watching the cabin more closely, looking for signs. The shadows in the corners seemed too dense. The reflections in the windows lingered a little too long. There was something about the cabin that felt unaware, as if the wood itself was listening. The decorative tiles, the placement of the furniture, even the creaky floorboards, they all seemed part of something older, something that didn't like being disturbed. That afternoon, I went for a walk alone to clear my head. The forest was quiet, the sun dappled across the trail, and for a moment I felt normal again, grounded. But when I returned to the cabin, I hesitated before stepping through the door. I glanced up at the roof, half expecting to see someone standing there. Of course, there was nothing, just the darkened shingles and the whisper of wind through the trees. But I knew the quiet wouldn't last. That night, the guys stayed up again, louder than before, singing and telling stories. I stayed in the room, alone this time. My brother had passed out on the couch. The creaking started just after midnight. I didn't get out of bed. I didn't try to investigate. I simply listened. This time, the sounds were slower, a dragging step, a pause, a scratch. It moved from one end of the ceiling to the other, directly above my head. Then silence, then the sound of something settling on the roof. I closed my eyes tightly, trying not to imagine what it looked like, trying not to picture hands reaching down from the rafters. When morning finally came, I was exhausted, pale. The others noticed, but I blamed it on lack of sleep and too much fresh air. I never told them what I had felt. Some things I think live longer when spoken. When we returned home, I didn't talk about the cabin for a long time, but the memory lingers. Sometimes when I lie in bed at night, I hear the creak of the ceiling and remember that weekend. I remember the way the bronze tile moved, the grip on my arm, and the way the darkness seemed to hold its breath. I don't think it meant to harm me, but I do think it wanted me to know it was there, watching, listening, waiting, and I think, in some strange way, I acknowledged it. That might be all it ever needed. Language. Story 8. The Goblin in the Moonlight. There are some memories that lie dormant for years until a certain light, sound or dream stirs them back into vivid life. This one is etched into my mind like a scar. Unchanged by time, unchanged by disbelief. I was 9 or 10 years old, attending a summer camp in Muskoka, Ontario. It was a place where the forest felt infinite and the lakes mirrored the sky with such clarity that it often felt like you were floating between two worlds. The camp was split into 2 weeks, one spent in cabins with bunkmates and another on a canoe trip. I remember sleeping on the top bunk, wedged into the corner of a cabin with about 5 other bunks. The counsellor had their own space behind a curtain, a thin veil of privacy in a room that breathed together every night. It was sometime in the early morning hours when I woke. The cabin was silent. Moonlight poured in through the windows, casting faint silver lines across the wood-panelled floor. I rubbed my eyes, unsure why I was awake. No noises, no dreams, just a feeling. That deep, pulsing instinct that something wasn't right. As I adjusted to the dim light, I peered over the edge of the bunk. And that's when I saw it. In the centre of the cabin, hunched over and moving slowly, was a figure. Not quite human, not quite animal. Its form was outlined by the pale moonlight, and what I saw remains etched into my mind like a nightmare that refuses to blur. It was no taller than 5 feet, with limbs that seemed just a bit too long and fingers that curled like hooks. Its face was pointed, almost goblin-like, with sharp features and a strange unnatural grace. It didn't walk, it glided, each step eerily silent, and it sniffed the air as it moved, as if trying to identify something. It moved from bed to bed, leaning over each of the kids sleeping on the lower bunks, breathing them in. I couldn't move. My body was frozen, paralyzed with terror. I watched, unable to look away, hoping it wouldn't notice the top bunks. But then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it turned and walked toward the door. It opened it with a creak, stepped out into the night, and with one swift motion, knocked over the fire barrel just outside. The noise woke the counsellor, who shouted out to be careful of the barrel, not realizing that the creature had already disappeared into the woods. That moment confirmed something for me, that the counsellor had been asleep the entire time, that I hadn't imagined what I saw, and that whatever it was had slipped in and out of our cabin while we slept. It hadn't been a dream. It had been real. Years passed. I grew older, went on with life, and buried the memory deep, chalking it up to a childhood hallucination or a trick of the light, but it never really faded. It stayed with me like a whisper in the back of my mind, and sometimes, late at night, I would remember the sound of that barrel falling and the way that creature had moved. Now, in my late 30s, I can say that I've never seen anything like it since, but I've read stories, I've heard legends, tales of forest spirits, cryptids, watchers in the trees. The thing I saw fits no neat category, no well-documented myth. It was real, and it was hunting, or watching, or waiting. I've often wondered what it wanted. Was it simply looking for something awake? Did it need acknowledgement? Or was it searching for a child that wouldn't scream, one that wouldn't run? That's what haunts me most, the way it moved, the way it sniffed the air, as if trying to detect the one child who knew it was there. Over the years, I've tried to piece together what that encounter meant. I never returned to that camp. I never shared the full story with friends, afraid of being mocked or pitied. But the details never faded. Not the moonlight, not the pointed face, not the chilling silence of its steps. And now when I walk alone in the woods, especially under a full moon, I can't help but feel that same frozen breath in my lungs, like something is nearby, watching again, waiting again, as if once you've seen it, truly seen it, it never quite lets go. There's a part of me that believes the creature was ancient, something from deep folklore that predates our modern stories. A guardian, a hunter, a lost spirit, I may never know. But I believe it lives in those woods still, gliding through the trees under moonlight, passing through forgotten cabins, searching for eyes that open in the dark. Some might say I was lucky it left. Others might say I was chosen simply because I woke up and survived. But I often wonder what would have happened if I had been on the bottom bunk, if I had been face to face with it. Would it have paused? Would it have spoken? Or would I never have woken again? It's the kind of memory that changes your relationship with the night, with quiet, with solitude. I now sleep with a small light on, a habit I've never quite outgrown. Not because I fear monsters under the bed, but because I know sometimes they don't need to hide. Sometimes they walk through your door, quiet as breath, as real as the floor beneath your feet, and all they need is moonlight and silence to step through. So if you ever find yourself in a camp cabin far from town, with the moon pouring in through the windows and your breath suddenly held in your chest for reasons you can't explain, don't look down. Don't peer over the edge, because something might be waiting there. Not to hurt you, perhaps, but to see if you're awake. Story 9. The Cabin by the Crying Lake. I was 13 when I visited my grandparents' cabin, nestled in the woods near a still, quiet lake. The air was always colder there, crisper, as if the trees held their breath through the seasons. My grandparents were warm and welcoming, their lives slower, quieter, and far from the reach of cell towers and city sounds. That winter I brought a friend along with me. She loved horror movies and long walks in the snow just as much as I did. There was no Wi-Fi, no modern distractions, just an old television with a VCR and stacks of horror films collected by my grandmother over the years. It was perfect in a strange, forgotten kind of way, a little surreal, like stepping into another time. The cabin itself stood on a small rise overlooking the lake, and from the upper room we could see the frozen water glowing under the pale moonlight. We arrived late after a long road trip, bundled in coats and scarves, still brimming with energy. My grandfather showed us to our room upstairs, a cozy space with a big bed and a balcony that offered an eerie but beautiful view of the snow-covered lake. I always got warm at night, so I opened the window to let the cold air in. After unpacking and drinking hot chocolate made by my grandmother, we showered, got into pajamas and browsed through the stack of horror movies. We finally settled on Friday the 13th, a classic that never failed to make us laugh nervously and double-check the shadows in the corners. By the time the credits rolled, our eyes were heavy, and the cold had settled into the walls like a presence. The next morning brought sunlight sparkling across the snow. It was beautiful, pure and utterly still. My grandfather agreed to let us take a walk along the forest trail, a well-marked path he said we could safely follow for about an hour. My grandmother packed snacks and soda into a small backpack, gave us a few warnings, and reminded us not to leave the trail under any circumstances. We were young, curious, and just rebellious enough to nod and agree without really planning to follow that last instruction. The forest welcomed us with creaking branches and the soft crunch of snow beneath our boots. We laughed, took pictures, and wandered deeper, savouring the solitude. But about halfway through, something changed. We heard it. A faint sound, barely audible, like crying. It was a girl's voice. At first, we froze, unsure whether we were imagining it. But then it came again, soft and fractured. "Help me." It was distant yet clear, and it pulled us forward like a hook through fog. My friend hesitated, urging caution, saying it could be a trap, but I pushed ahead, driven by the possibility that someone truly needed help. We followed the voice through the trees, off the path, deeper into the woods. The snow was uneven now, and the air felt colder, heavier. That's when we saw the cabin. It was run down, forgotten by time, with broken shutters and a door hanging on one hinge. But what chilled us most wasn't the state of the cabin, it was the blood in the snow outside it. I tried to convince myself that it was animal blood, a fox perhaps, or a rabbit, taken by some predator. But the feeling in my stomach said otherwise. We crept toward the cabin, calling out softly, asking if anyone was there. No answer came, only the eerie quiet of a place that had long since been abandoned. The door creaked open with a push, revealing the inside. Clothing was strewn about, shoes, a shirt, undergarments, mixed with rotting food, cobweb-covered dishes and furniture in various states of decay. We explored further, stepping over collapsed planks and broken glass. In one of the rooms we found something that made us both freeze. Chains bolted to the wall. A stained mattress, rusted tools and knives scattered on a table, dried blood along the wooden floor. Just then, from behind us, we heard a soft noise. Turning around, we saw a girl standing in the doorway. Pale, silent, unmoving. Her clothes were thin and torn, her hair tangled, her eyes were wide, unblinking. We didn't scream. We didn't speak. We just ran. We sprinted through the snow, back toward the trail, not looking back, afraid that if we turned around, she'd be there again, closer this time. We didn't stop until we saw the familiar curve of the forest trail, and even then, we didn't slow down. We didn't tell our grandparents what we saw. We feared they wouldn't believe us, or worse, that they would take it seriously and forbid us from ever returning. That night, we tried to distract ourselves with more movies, soft blankets and warm tea, but neither of us slept well. At some point in the night I woke to the sound of screaming. My friend was standing on the balcony barefoot, pointing out toward the lake. I rushed to her side, asking why she was yelling, and she told me it wasn't her scream, it was theirs. She pointed again. Below, by the edge of the lake, we saw them. Several girls, standing in the snow, dressed in rags. Their mouths were open, screaming silently. They didn't move. They just stood there, staring up at us with empty expressions. We slammed the window shut and backed away, trembling. My parents, now awake, burst into the room, demanding to know what was going on. Through tears and fear, we told them everything. At first, my grandparents insisted there was no one outside. My grandmother said she'd been on the porch and hadn't heard anything. But when we described the cabin, the voices, and the girl in the doorway, something changed in her eyes. She sat us down and in a low voice said that years ago, a man had lived deep in those woods. He had kidnapped girls, kept them in a hidden cabin, and did unspeakable things. He was eventually caught, but the bodies of several victims were never found. Some say they still roamed those woods, lost, searching for peace. She believed that what we saw were their spirits, still crying out for help in the only way they could. I've never returned to that trail. I still visit my grandparents sometimes and I still look at that lake, but I never walk past the edge of the trees. I don't look for the cabin, and I don't ignore the sound of crying when the wind moves just right, because I believe those girls are still there. I believe they're trapped in the memory of what happened to them, and I believe somehow they chose us not to scare, but to be seen, to be remembered, and maybe in some small way to be mourned.